2, 1.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Brock McMillan. We have some echo we're working on. Hello, hello, hello. Are we good now? We're still working on it. Sorry for the late start, everyone. We've had a few technical difficulties. I'll call the meeting to order. It is 6:08 p.m. on the 5th of April. Welcome to the Central Regional Advisory Council meeting. This meeting is being held in person at the DWR Central Region office in Springville, as well as being streamed live on YouTube. This is a public forum allowing you to express your opinions and proposals on the management of wildlife in our state. The RAC considers your ideas, opinions, proposals, and reports them to the Wildlife Board. The Wildlife Board is charged with setting wildlife policy for our state. And the next statement is just be nice. So we all have our ideas of what we should be doing. Just be cordial. I'd like to welcome the RAC members and ask each of them to introduce themselves. Let's start with Jim.
I'm Jim Schuler, non-consumptive.
Eric Reed, BLM. Luke Decker, U.S. Forest Service.
Ken Strong, Sportsman Rep.
Dan Potts, outdoor interests, non-consumptive interests. I am interested in the outdoors.
Mike Christensen, the large.
Joshua Leonard, Sportsman's Rep.
Ben Lauder, Public at Large.
And Chase and Scott, I think you're both online. If you want to introduce yourself, let's start with Chase.
Chase Crandall, Agriculture.
Scott Jensen, Public at Large.
Excellent. And then I have Jason Vernon, the Central Region Supervisor, sitting next to me. I'd also like to welcome and thank Covey Jones, Big Game Coordinator, for being here. Chad Wilson, Private Lands Public Wildlife Coordinator, and Gary Nilsson from the Wildlife Board for being here. Welcome to the public that are in attendance and watching on YouTube. Those that are attending in person will have the opportunity to provide comments regarding any agenda item. If you wish to make a comment, you must fill out one of the cards that's on the table outside the door here and hand it up so that we have a time to get it before that topic is being discussed. The public that are watching on YouTube will not be able to provide live comments during this meeting. However, all of these presentations were provided well in advance for viewing online, and the public was able to provide comments to the RAC for this RAC meeting before this meeting, and we have a summary of all those comments. I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda. We have a motion from Ken Strong. Do we have a second? And a second from Ben Lauder. All in favor, show by a hand. Chase and Scott, yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, 2 yeses, so unanimous, very good. My turn to give a brief update from the last board meeting, which I'm not prepared for. But we did have a board meeting last week. It was a work session. Everybody was invited to watch online, or you could come in person. There were a few public there in person, but we spent all day talking about a whole bunch of topics with the Wildlife Board. The first half of the day was spent talking about deer herds in the state of Utah. And then there were several other topics that were covered in the afternoon, including translocation of deer and policies on translocation, a whole bunch of other things. I thought it was super informative. I know Danny was there, and I thought there was a lot of really good information presented, and the state's doing incredible work. So in my opinion, they're doing incredible work, Covey and all the wildlife group on studying the wildlife that we care so much about in this state, and I appreciate the efforts that they're making. Turn the time over to Jason for a regional update.
All right, thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. It looks like that's coming up. Is that up? All right, just a few things that I'd like to report to the RAC on this this evening. For our wildlife section, it was a really crazy and busy winter. We had quite a few nuisance animals or animals that were in the wrong place, mostly in the valleys that we needed to move. One of the things that we ended up moving quite a bit was moose. I don't know if you ever watched the news. There were about a week or 2 weeks where we ended up closing down I-80 in Parley's Canyon a few times, or at least some slowdowns to move moose out of the median there. I think we ended up moving about 12 moose out of that median. It was a lot of collaborative work with UDOT and with Highway Patrol. As you can imagine, our wildlife biologists to get into that situation, it's a little bit unsettling as you're walking up and down the freeway with cars zipping by you 80 miles an hour and trying to figure out how to safely dart a moose and get it down and get it off and get it out of there. So appreciate working with our partners on that. And throughout the entire winter, I think we moved about 20 moose, 12 on the freeway, and then through different urban areas throughout Salt Lake and throughout the different valleys, Park City and Heber. Currently, we have sage grouse classifications on their leks in full swing. If any of the RAC members would be interested in going out with our biologists to count on those leks, we'd love to have you out there and invite you to go out. Just get in touch with me and I can make those arrangements for you, get you in touch with our biologists. If you've never been on a lek to watch sage grouse, you really should take advantage to do it, and now's a great time to do it. One of the things that we have done also is they did elk surveys on the Wasatch this last February. These were flights that we took to count elk. Usually on each of these units, we try to get those on a 3-year rotation. Sometimes it may vary just a little bit depending on weather. But we were successful in getting those surveys, and some of the recommendations you're seeing tonight come from those surveys. From our aquatic section, this last week, starting about last Thursday, we started to receive reports of a white bass fish kill out on Utah Lake. So we started to assess what was going on out there. We ended up going out and collecting fish from there, sending it to our fish health folks, working with DEQ and other partners to try to identify what the problem was. Weren't really able to identify anything specific. We looked at a lot of different things. Algae, it was fortunate we had some of our partners were sampling for algae, the blue-green algae out there right before the fish kill, and levels were normal, and that didn't seem to be the issue. Of course, we had some temperatures increase really quickly out there. They're starting to come into the spawn. There's several reasons we might have had that fish kill. The fish that we did sample were healthy white bass, and they were really the only ones that seemed targeted to be dying. So kind of a interesting, strange situation that we had there, and we're still assessing that. Another item for Utah Lake, I'll be talking about that a couple times tonight. The division's put together an advisory council to create a Utah Lake Fisheries management plan. You're probably aware that we do have a management plan on Utah Lake for the June sucker, and that's a collaborative effort. But we've never really had a sports fish management plan for the lake. So we're looking at pulling that together. We've got a lot of different partners, anglers and agency and parties that are interested in the lake. So we're we're excited to get that going. We've had one meeting and waiting for a meeting, but hopefully we'll have a solid sports fish management plan for the lake moving forward. In our habitat section, another Utah Lake item. I don't know if you've heard of the Provo River Delta Restoration Project. In the upper right-hand corner of the slide, there's a map. In the bottom left corner of that map is Utah Lake. In the bottom, you can kind of see the Provo River where it currently runs, where those trees are, and that's been channelized through, 100 years of people living in the area. So we've really lost the connection between the river and that kind of a delta braided system, which would dump into the lake. So as a partner with Utah Reclamation Mitigation Conservation Committee, they're working really hard, and we're assisting them to pull together a really a delta, what it would have looked like maybe before we came into the valley. The delta has got a few objectives, primarily to help recover the June sucker, provide habitat, brooding habitat in those areas, but it's also going to provide some recreation opportunities, hunting, fishing, waterfowl. We're excited to be working with them on this. They've been working on the dirt work out there for about 2 years now. We anticipate being able to move the river channel from where it currently is over into the delta by the end of this year. So we're excited about that. They've done a lot of good work out there, and we're excited for what that'll look like. Also in our habitat section, they've had a busy spring. They've planted about 10,000 shrub seedlings across winter range on our WMAs. You can kind of see that bottom right picture. It just looks like it kind of goes on for infinity there, the shrubs that they've put into the ground. But again, I just want to highlight, a lot of this work that we're doing, we partner with others, and this work wouldn't get done without the volunteers and dedicated hunters and all those that have a passion for wildlife and want to make the habitat the best they can for these wildlife. So we appreciate all those that came out and helped us get these seedlings in the ground. In our outreach section, an event that's coming up this Saturday is our Mountain Goat Viewing Day. And this is held at Little Cottonwood Canyon at the mouth of the canyon at the park and ride there. An event that we've held frequently in the past and had good success with mountain goats on the hill right there above the park and ride. So if you haven't had a chance to get out, or if you're able to get your family out, this is a pretty easy and good spot to see the mountain goats. We'll have spotting scopes and to be able to help you with that. And then again, one of the things that I wanted to highlight was we had a turkey seminar here just recently in this room. And a big shout out to NWTF for helping with that turkey seminar. They live streamed the seminar, and it was a good success, and we were excited about those types of things. And as I wrap up, like I said, I just want to thank all our partners and volunteers and everybody that comes out to make this work happen, because a lot of this work wouldn't happen without them. So with that, thank you, and I'll take any questions if the RAC has any.
Go ahead, Jim.
Jason, I have a question. I was just curious where the moose were in association with the new kind of overpass. It was kind of helping with the moose?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jim. So most of the moose have been finding a way through the fence just right at the Mountain Dell Lamb Canyon area. So probably about 2 miles down canyon from where the overcross is or the overpass is. So they've been finding a way through there, and we're working with UDOT and try to figure out how to seal that off quite a bit tighter. Go ahead, Mike.
I have one question. So does the division have any advisory capacity with the Utah Lake Authority that was just created by the legislature?
That is a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure that we've been given direction specifically. I think it's such a new bill that was passed that we're going to have to wait to see what role we play on that.
Yeah, and I just encourage whoever's in the division can get in early on the process to, protect fishing and hunting situations there. Be good.
For sure. Thanks, Mike. Danny, do you have something?
Yeah,
almost analogous to that.
Almost analogous to that would be the inland port area. You know, I know that the central region it's just barely over the border. But you know, we have one of the most incredible watchable wildlife opportunities, like 5-10 minutes out of downtown Salt Lake City, where else could you see upwards of, you know, 50-80 American antelope right off the freeway? It's just incredible. I think that is conducive, at least for many years, until they build out, right? I think that's still conducive for those antelope if the wildlife resources could get involved. And so, do you know anything about that?
Our northern region staff have been handling that. I wouldn't be able to speak to that right now, but I hear what you're saying, and you know, those are challenges where we've had wildlife in these areas for a long time, and we're just building out, and those things need to happen. And so it's a balancing act to try to make sure that we're providing the habitat, but also being able to be responsive to growth.
Well, they're pretty habituated, and so they ran into the International Center a while back, and about 20 of them. It was hilarious.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else for Jason or the region? Okay, next thing on is to move to the first agenda item, which is the buck deer permit recommendations. I guess we'll call Covey up to the microphone and open the floor for questions for Covey regarding the buck deer recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to answer any question I can. Also remember, if there are regional questions, that the regional staff gets super excited, preps all year long for this meeting, so we'd hate to take away an opportunity for them to answer questions about their districts.
Yeah, thank you, Dale, Rusty, Wes, Morgan, everybody. Oh, Jason Robinson's online for the Tooele, Oker, Stansbury area. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I'm going to start on the Wasatch West. I'm looking at the numbers here in the recommendation. We're recommending a decrease of 300 permits. As I'm looking at the buck to doe ratio, we're right in line with where that unit should be. I imagine there's some other factors at play here, so I'm just curious about what those are or where that recommendation on the decrease is coming from.
No, that's a really good question, and we'll let the region take it. But before we do, and you know, all right, when we make buck permit recommendations on general season units, we consider a few things. If we're managing deer like we were before 2019, the only things we would consider would be buck doe ratio, trend, the last year's buck doe ratio, and the 3-year average. That's it. When we rewrote the plan in 2019, we added a few things to that. And the reason why we did it is because we have more data. So managing deer has always been a reactive thing. It's always been reactive. But with real survival rates and collars on the landscape, we can be more proactive. And so with collars on the landscape, real survival rates on the landscape, what we do is we look at how many yearling bucks we should have coming into that unit, understanding that on a general season unit, that makes up a lot of the harvest. And then we project forward as to what that should look like under different harvest scenarios. And we evaluate the number of bucks on the landscape and can anticipate likely harvest. Now, it's not perfect. Biological systems are complicated, but it's good. I was just looking back. We've been doing this since 2019. And it's starting to really true. And it's fun to look back and say, okay, we got all these ones right. We missed this one a little bit. Why? Did we underpredict harvest? Did we overpredict survival? What did we miss on this one and why? But the majority of the time we are managing closer because we're using more data. With that, the cut is primarily its survival rates on the Wasatch. So your adult survival rate, your fawn survival rate, they're lower. But Dale, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
right on the head right there. We've had several years of low fawn recruitment. Like any lot that we've dropped close to 5,000 deer in the last 2 years because of the drought. We're seeing this, across the state. And when you don't have as many young deer coming into the system, that also says that you're not going to have bucks coming up. Through fawns, yearlings, 2.5-year-olds. So we're just trying to get ahead of this. We can see it's trending downward. So we're just trying to get ahead of it. And, hopefully we'll have a better year as far as precipitation goes. But
Yeah, I was just going to follow up. This year, was it 63 fawns per 100 does?
yeah, it was up a little bit. And the year before it was down to 52. So
Do you know what the survival is of those fawns?
it was really low. 43, yeah.
Last year? So, because so far this year, it's the highest it's ever been, except the first year we had.
So.
Okay, thank you.
And in our computer models, when we plug all this information in, we can watch the population go up, we can watch the population go down. So we're watching the population go down, and so we're just trying to get ahead of the game.
Okay,
So-
I
Go ahead.
appreciate that explanation and I love the fact that we're being proactive on this. With all the data we've got from the callers is awesome. I love it. So, thank you.
Can I ask you one more question, Dale? If you would have known going into the winter that you'd have the highest fawn survival since we started, would you have changed the recommendation or not?
No, because I'm looking at the model. I'm watching the model, and I'm watching if the population's going up or the population's going down. And, since I've been a biologist, the population has kind of stayed just right at where we wanted it to. We had good precipitation all those years. And then all of a sudden we hit these drought years, and we can just watch on the computer model, we can just watch the population drop. So, I think it's warranted. I think we need to get ahead of the game. And because if we didn't, I'm quite sure next year when I did the pulse season counts, my buck to doe ratio would be low. So.
Thank you.
Hey, before you go, one more question. So what I've watched about every decade or so is that we have this incredible snowfalls, in the wintertime, and those, if they don't go into the winter really, really well, or if the snow's just too deep and too powdery, they literally get stranded and can literally starve to death. And you find them just all piled up in the bottoms of the ravines along the Wasatch here. Are we seeing any of that?
No.
Okay.
No.
Because, if the snow is just too deep and they can't get to food and they've gone into the winter in poor condition, then we would expect, wouldn't we?
Yeah, we just have low fawn survival from the time of birth, and until fall. And then once going into the winter, we're also seeing the fawn population drop.
Well, that's why I'm saying, okay, all right.
But we're not seeing the mass starvations that we typically see in really bad winters.
Yeah, and that's all I'm referring to are those really bad winters, those once a
Right,
decade
right.
or so. Okay.
Do you have another question, Ben?
Yeah, just follow up on the fawn survival. So Brock was just telling us that this year we've got a really high fawn survival. So how many years have we had a low fawn survival rate on this unit?
About 2.
Okay. All right, thanks.
And by the way, Ben, we're only 3 months into this year, but relative to other years, it's really high. Go ahead, Jim.
Just for Covey.
Sure.
So first of all, excellent presentations, concise, clear, really well done. So kudos to you and your team. I do have a question, more of a 30,000 foot question. So in the deer, your objective for deer in the state is 404,900. We have 305,700. So we're short by 99,200 deer. And the answer was, well, let's reduce the tags by 1,250. And a lot of the comments that I was reading were, let's do more. Let's really turn this deer population around. Why, or what's the theory by such a big difference in the population for such a small change in the tags?
I actually was hoping that we would get this question tonight, and I try to clarify this every chance I get. Brock's smiling because as a researcher, he knows why. But I'll do two things. One, I'll give the short answer, and then we'll give the explanation, okay? The short answer is because it wouldn't grow any deer, right? So I call it the Disneyfication of America. You know, everybody thinks, or you assume that because deer run around, in order to have more deer on the landscape, you reduce harvest, you have more males, and then they run around in these happy little families where you have a daddy deer and a mommy deer, and they have baby deer. That's not how it works. It's not how it works at all. The way that it works in nature and in deer, in the life history of deer, is that you have enough males on the landscape to breed the does post-season. And if you have that, your productivity is at its highest that it could be. Every time we sample deer pregnancy rates, I won't give this answer. Let's ask, can I ask Brock to step out for just 1 second? Brock, what are the deer pregnancy rates when we sample as an agency in collaboration with our partners at BYU?
95 to 97%.
So you come back and you ask yourself and you say, if all the females are pregnant and we're not growing deer, what is the problem? If we're only harvesting males and all the does are pregnant, why aren't we growing? And that's where these collar studies and getting at cause-specific mortality and identifying limiting factors, that's how you grow deer. You grow deer by saying, okay, if we only have 70% adult female survival, and we know that we want 85% adult female survival, like that's a good solid number. Anything above that, we can start to really grow deer. Anything below that, we're probably going to lose deer, depending upon the scenario, but probably going to lose deer. If we know that we have 70% adult female survival, then the question is why? What percent are we losing and how? And that's where we come back and say, all right, if it's body condition and the females are just skinny and they're skinny over winter, they're having their fawns weigh less, their likelihood of survival on their fawns is lower, then we may have a density dependent issue. We may have a density independent issue, which would just be poor quality forage, and everybody on the landscape is skinny. It could be driven by drought. It could be driven by, so you start to look at why these deer are skinny and why they're surviving poorly. Okay, if it's other causes and the deer are fat, and this is the perfect, you know, the South Manti example, we came in and we had poor survival, and that was coupled with fat deer. They weren't dying from malnutrition. None of them were. They were dying from mostly predation, and in this case, mountain lions. And so when that is the case, it's almost like the answer is just sent to you, because we were able to increase harvest, reduce predation, and that population, what's our survival on the Manti? 68 to 92% in 1 year. Now we can grow some deer. Fat, healthy deer without that top-down pressure. If we have bottom-up issues, which would be habitat issues, we're going to work on that. But if you let males just continue to increase, they will do it at the expense of females, right? If you're not growing deer and you're losing deer and you start to let males go unchecked or unharvested, they do it at the expense of females, and you create a less productive herd for when conditions actually align to grow deer, right? If 80% of your deer on your landscape are female and conditions align to grow, that's what it'll hold today. But tomorrow things change a little bit. You get a little better climate, a little more moisture, fatter deer. All right, that 80% segment of the population then can have fawns, and you hit those right conditions and you grow, boom, boom, boom. If you skew that sex ratio to where 50% of those animals are male and 50% are female, you grow at a much slower rate. And so the hardest thing to understand, like, you know, we always, if you love something, sometimes you want to hold on to it really tight, right? You just want to grip it and hold on to it really tight. Well, deer are like Jello. Sometimes if you hold onto the bucks too tight, they just slip between your fingers, right? You're not going to gain anything by skewing those sex ratios. You're going to make a less productive herd, and it will hurt deer over time. I can explain this, but it really takes a rancher to understand it. You know, if I looked at a rancher and said, you know, why wouldn't you? I asked Justin Shannon one time, I said, is there anybody in here that would run one bull per cow? And Justin raised his hand and said, yeah, I would. If I only had one cow and needed one bull, then I would. But anything above that, you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't do it because it would make your herd much less productive.
So if you had no doe permits, you only had buck permits, you kept your same buck permits exactly the same, but you had no doe permits, you would not grow your herd?
It depends on what your survival rates are and what's causing the death. Right now, we're not harvesting does at a rate anywhere in the state that would probably actually have any kind of an impact, right? Maybe localized depredation populations. You could harvest does in a manner that does have an impact, and we're not doing it.
Go ahead, Chase.
Covey, I've got a question for you regarding this, and it probably covers all of the other topics as well. We're going into the third year of a drought. At least at the moment, it's not looking like it's going to get any better. I mean, it could always rain tomorrow, but more than likely not. I know that, you know, I, as a rancher, I have had to decrease my herd numbers because of this drought. Last year, I had to decrease my numbers both on my BLM and on private ground, just my own private herd. Do the population goals that we have for across the entire state, does that account for drought? Because in my mind, I would think that we should be decreasing herd numbers all across the state. And so in my mind, I'm going to be the only person in the room thinking this, but I think that we should be increasing tags and licenses all across the state on all units.
Well, and Chase, your question really is for antlerless permits. And the answer is yes. Every drought year, we have come back in August. And if you look at the state, you're really probably talking more about elk and antlerless permits because deer self-regulate. But looking at elk and antlerless permits, every year we've had drought, we've come back in August to the Wildlife Board. We don't go through this process, but it's in the plan to go back to the Wildlife Board specifically and ask for additional permits. And we do that every single year. Now, you could look at that and say, yeah, but you grew 4,000 elk last year in your population estimates for elk. Well, we did. We fly the state on a 5-year rotation, and the areas that we grew on are primarily private land. So we're not talking public land allotments. We're not talking southern Utah. We're talking the areas that are 98%, like the Chalk Creek, these areas in northern Utah where elk are part of CWMUs. And so when you see the antlerless permits, that story doesn't all add up, but we're working with those CWMUs to harvest those animals. Now, we're not getting complaints from the grazers saying, hey, we want fewer elk. And we're not, because those animals have a lot of value. We are starting to get concern of, we're worried about our elk having an impact on our deer. And rightfully so. You know, you hit a certain level where just animals on the landscape, you're going to end up with competition. And so we're working with them through the CWMU program to try and harvest more antlerless elk in those areas. But those are the areas where we really have, it's been a crazy flip over the last 30 years where you couldn't have an elk in northern Utah on these private lands 30 years ago. And now those are the areas where we have the hardest time putting the populations back in check because they're so desired.
So just to clarify, we are working with these drought conditions and you are regulating according to those?
Every year we're harvesting above and pushing a lot of times back below those population objectives in order to address range concerns and those issues.
Okay.
But that's a special board meeting in August.
Thank you.
Got a question. So Covey, on the Wasatch, we lost 20% of our deer herd, and we are cutting tags by 300. And on the Pine Valley, we lost 20% of our deer herd, and we're cutting tags by 60%. So can you kind of give us the basis for why that is?
Yeah, so as we look back through that, and I understand what you're saying, just based on the numbers from last year to this year, the Wasatch has definitely been. Sometimes your models take a second to catch up, frankly, and it showed up this year, but we knew we were slightly trending down for more than that, if I'm completely honest. But the difference is the fawn doe ratios and the fawn survival. That's one of the biggest drivers in these general season units. So adult doe survival, poor on both units, right? But then on the Pine Valley, we only had like 38 fawns per 100 does, and survival on those was low 30s. I have the exact numbers right here in front of me. 34 fawns per 100 does. And then the survival rates on those.
Last year was about 30%. This year so far it's about 62 or 63.
So we're surviving at a better rate, and that's good. I'm excited about that. And Brock's right. So this year's fawn survival, when you look at it, there was a point where it looked like it was going to follow the last several years. If you look at the line, and if anybody doesn't have access, anybody online listening, there's a website where survival rates are tracked. It's the BYU Ecology Lab website. It's open to the public. It's open to anyone. So if anybody wants to see this, you can just Google BYU Ecology and then click on the View Data Dashboard button and look at survival rates for these populations. But those factors, the poor survival is really the big driver. So with this more proactive approach, and you're seeing it on some of the northern region units where we're recommending some decent increases on the cash, recommending 1,000 permit increase, you're going to see more jumps in permits. But we hope to manage to a more consistent buck-doe ratio. So it's like adding data, jumping faster in permits up and down, but then buck-doe ratios should stay, hopefully, if we do it right, they should stay more within the parameters. Instead of like the Pine Valley, we were up at 24 for years. And so it's an aggressive cut.
Well, I guess that's kind of my concern is we were so high for so long, and the Southern Region RAC and the Wildlife Board wouldn't allow the division to increase those permits to bring that buck-to-doe ratio into objective. Is that a fair statement? You don't have to say yes or no.
I want to say the public process made it difficult.
It did. And so the public process being part of it scares me that we're going to cut 2,700 tags. Our fawn survivability ratio is double what it was last year. And because those will be our yearling bucks that come into the herd for this fall. And how are we going to get those 2,700 permits back? That's my concern. Like if the division, if that buck-to-doe ratio starts to climb and the division recommends 1,200 permit increase, the data that I have in my mind from past years shows that the division won't get that. And so I'm a little bit worried that cut is really extreme without having some data and numbers on the screen to show me why.
Well, I can go through some of the numbers if you want me to, Mike, but let me say something first. I actually share your concerns. Like, I mean, if you want me to be completely honest, like it feels like it's always easy and popular to cut permits, and it's hard and unpopular to raise permits. And with deer, like, you can't save them. You might as well hunt them. Like, you can't just put them on a shelf and save them. You know, we've seen that drought will take them and other things will impact them. So, well, we've got deer, we should hunt deer. Like, I think the data we're using is the best we can, but if we're not allowed to be responsive with our cuts and our increases, it won't work. So, but I can go through some of these data. I've got them here. What would be the best way to do it? Would it be for me to join the meeting or?
Covey, while you're pulling those up, well, maybe you can't think and answer a question at the same time, so I'll keep you focused on one task.
Okay. Mike, I don't know if I have the link. Who sent that out?
Mike, I share your concerns there. I have very similar concerns. And when we get this data up, Covey, if you could go over or address whether or not when these permits or when this recommendation was made, whether it was modeled with a low, medium, or high success rate.
Yeah, we can go over that.
Thanks.
I just not into that.
You are literally the best, Jason. I don't care what other people say. So mute myself.
Bad chance.
Trying to mute all day long. Can we at least turn my camera off? Okay. All right. So, Mike, just to clarify something you said that that will be this year's bucks coming in. No, that fawn survival. Oh, yes, it should be this year's bucks coming in. You're right. We didn't predict that at last year, though, and you were right, Mike. Good job. Remember that. Okay, it's up. It should come up right now. All right, so these are just some of the data. This is just basically a summary sheet of some of the data that we used when we made this recommendation. But adult doe survival, 77%. That's terrible. But when you combine that with 32% survival on the fawns, it's really, really bad.
So Covey, so 75% adult survival. I don't think we got the adult survival off the Wasatch, if I recall. I'm just looking for
It's
comparison.
low 70s. It was lower. More fawns.
Wasatch was lower adult survival rate?
Lower adult doe.
Okay,
Yeah.
so similar.
Similar, but way more fawns.
Right. Okay.
And high, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
You come in, and this is where biologists were asked to do this in February, remember that, but predict forward. And so predicting forward, population estimate, model population estimate, current buck doe ratio was 16. So after hunting them at that level, we dropped to 16 in 1 year. That was with 24% permits filled, right? So of the 4,100, we filled 24% on the general season. Lowest in the last 5 years. So of that 24% permits filled, then predict forward and say, all right, it's a desert unit. It was 77, but we could have 82% adult doe survival. I think that's seriously under predicting anything. And then what we've averaged 48% adult or fawn survival over the last 5 years. Jason, the biologist, went with average. So what that translates to then, if we came in at high success, would be outside the ratio at 16.2. With average success, would be just outside the ratio at 17.6. And with low success, would be right in the middle of the ratio at 19.2. Now, there's a chance we'll probably come in between average and low. It's a pretty wide gap there between average and low. Success on the Pine Valley is pretty high. So
Covey, what drives buck harvest or success?
the thing that drives buck harvest is definitely the number of animals, the number of bucks on the landscape. Success is driven by, it's a combination of that and the number of hunters, but
So, and you're saying buck numbers are down on the landscape. And so we would expect success to go down even from last year.
Should
And what was
drive-
it last year?
well, I didn't say down even from last year. I said it should be low. It was 24% last year. You could anticipate it probably being a little bit higher than last year. Maybe. Sure.
But, okay.
Yeah.
So I'm not, I mean, I see the numbers and I understand the concerns. I wouldn't like to see that. I don't think, I mean, those numbers are based on a success rate of 33%. I personally don't think that's going to happen if numbers are really down. And
Well, and under average success, so average success would be 33%. You'd come in just under the buck-doe ratio at 17. So
Cody, can you go back? I want to see the definition of high, low, and medium success.
sure,
I
it's
saw it
taking
there.
real success. So high on the Pine Valley, it's looking at the last 5 years. So we're trying to run real scenarios, look at high, look at low, and then look at average. And-
Perfect, thank you. That's
Yep.
what I wanted to see.
Okay.
So if we scroll back down, so this is recommending 1,700, and then the forecast of what we would see on the landscape with the 3 different success rates.
Yes.
And can we play with that number? Could we bump that to 2,000 recommended buck permits and see what changes? Is that a possibility?
We can, and I'll do it. But what I will say before I do it is, it's not really fair because the biologist is intimately involved in the unit. And he's the one who's, Jason's hunted this unit for the last 20 years. He's out there on the ground. We can do it, but I understand why he did what he did. And that's what I don't want to get into is a critical analysis of why he would pick this and go with average to low. Because he's been there longer than all of us, but I'll do it for the
Sake of conversation.
sake of conversation.
So I understand your concern and I think everybody appreciates what's gone through. I think it comes back to Mike's comment a minute ago is
Yeah.
it's so hard to increase on this unit. And then when something goes bad, we just cut dramatically.
Well, and my point is just that it's not plug and play. It's real life evaluation of what's going on. And you have to realize, like, Jason knows if he overshoots this, we're going to manage to the plan. So if we overshoot, like, there's going to be he knows that we're going to increase permits. We're going to push to increase permits.
So I'll throw just another observation, or I don't know Jason, so this is not an accusation, but you mentioned that he hunts this unit, which also creates a little bit of a conflict of interest.
Maybe he wants a
I don't
tag.
know. Exactly. Well, yeah, so.
Under this scenario, he probably won't get one.
Is he a lifetime license holder?
He is not.
Good question.
I'm wishing I were, though. So, yeah, I mean, and I think it's you're dealing with a biological science, right? It's not physics where when the numbers are off by 1, the tiles on the space shuttle come off and it burns up, right? It's a combination of the science and boots on the ground.
Well, thank you for humoring me on the numbers. I appreciate it.
No, and I appreciate it, Ben. I appreciate y'all asking.
Well, and I really appreciate that explanation too. I think it helps me as somebody who's going to vote on this, understand at least where he's coming from.
Yeah.
And I've never been really one to second guess a lot of the division numbers because you guys are the professionals. I think it's good to have a check and balance there. However we vote on this when it comes up to it, I'll probably make some kind of a statement about it needs to go both ways. If we're going to swing so low and the deer herd needs it, let's do it. But then when the deer herd comes back, we need to swing back high. And it's just, just like a farmer with his cows, drought year comes, he sells off a bunch and then they get good moisture and he's out in the country buying more pregnant cows to to rebuild and re-go again.
It's even more than that, Mike. It's having the confidence and data to predict before the swing, right? We can see it coming, and we're going to recommend the increase when folks are going to say, not yet, hold off one more year. But every year we wait means that we got to have a bigger increase. And it means that we're losing more hunting opportunity to natural mortality, which is, it's not a good thing. You know, and if you want extreme quality, sweet, we have a limited entry system. Go ahead and hunt that. But general season, the philosophy is to offer as much opportunity as we can and manage the buck-doe ratio.
So I think that's what everybody here is that so far has spoken is arguing, that let's make it as opportunity as we possibly can on these general units. They're not arguing the numbers. They're just saying, instead of maybe managing to the middle or the upper end, let's provide opportunity. Other questions for Covey? Questions from the public? I'll turn the time over to Jason to summarize the online comments.
All right, thanks, Brock. For the buck deer permit recommendations, we had 24 responses to the survey. We had 29% strongly agree, 29% somewhat agree, 4% neither agree nor disagree, 17% somewhat disagree, and 21% strongly disagree. Some of the trends that I saw as I was reading through this, I've got 4 things that I'd like to share. For the people that either strongly agreed or somewhat agreed, most of them was they agreed with the reduction in permits, which that makes sense. Interestingly enough, for 4 of the people that strongly disagreed or somewhat disagreed, they disagreed because they didn't think that the division went far enough on the reduction of permits. So they wanted what was asked for plus more reduction on those permits. We had 4 people mention that they appreciated the DWR using data and support the regional biologist suggestions. And then we had 2 unit specific requests, 1 unit specific request for the NEBO. And a couple of folks identified that they requested that the NEBO tags are reduced further than what the division has identified. Those were the primary trends that I pulled out of this information.
Thank you, Jason. We'll now hear public comments. Do we have? Troy Justison.
You're really going to make the birthday boy go first, huh?
Happy birthday, Troy. You don't look a day over 62. What are you, 54?
Yeah, I got the park closer to the building anyway, so we're good. So, no, Troy Justinson, Sportsman Fish and Wildlife. Mike, I feel some of the same pain that you do. As we as hunters, we get real good at cutting opportunity for ourselves, and so it concerns me. And Kobe has a great point that try as we may and as much as we want to, we can't save these things all the time. And so we need to take that opportunity to get our children out there, our families out there, friends, and go enjoy that resource while it's there. Having said that, I want to thank the division for, in this exact room, we had most all of our chapters throughout the state, 17 of them in this room, and they went through the recommendations. I appreciate them taking the time and explaining it to them, their recommendations to us. Most of my changes, we support the division's recommendations as proposed with the following exceptions. And most of these fall in the southern region. And the main one is that of the beaver. It still currently falls under the buck-to-doe ratio. The division's recommending 1,200 permits. They would like to see that cut to 1,000 permits. Jumping down to the Fillmore, the division's actually, they'd like to see that go to 800. They have some real concern there. I think Kobe may be able to point to it, talking about the fawn to doe ratio and some other things, but they have some real concerns with the deer herd there. They'd like to see the permits cut to 800. Jumping down to the Fillmore, the division is actually recommending an increase of 200 permits to 1,400 permits. They'd like to see that as at 1,000. Then the Penguin Lake, they're recommending the increase of 500 permits. They'd like to see it only increase 250. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. Eric Moss.
First of all, I just want to thank you all for your service. Hopefully my comments will help Covey's job be a little easier. One thing I feel that we could do as a general public is I feel that we don't get enough data. I would like to see on every single tag that's issued, whether it's an antlerless permit or a general deer tag, mandatory harvest reporting. So we know exactly what's being killed. I think this will also help with our spike hunts as well. There's the option if you have an archery tag to be able to kill a cow. I don't know that we know what exactly is being killed with those tags because it's not being reported. I know a lot of our information that we get is just a survey or a poll, and we're only getting a small portion. I feel if we did mandatory harvest reporting across the board for every single tag, it would only help our decisions and our biologists make those decisions better. So it's just one recommendation that I wanted to make this evening. I appreciate what you guys do. I know it's not an easy job, and I know you guys love wildlife as much as anybody, or you wouldn't be serving on the board. So thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Brian Hoover.
So when I got here tonight, Brock, I didn't really plan to come up, but you asked me if I came to voice a complaint, so I figured I better come up and at least voice something. First, I also want to recognize the RAC committee here and all of the efforts that it's put in and the time and the efforts that come down here to the meeting. More than anything, though, I want to reiterate Kobe's point and also expand on it a little bit. His point of more information and more data that is available now than has ever been. Wanted to expand on that just a little bit for my personal great appreciation and also the Utah Hounds Association great appreciation that is out there for the efforts that are being put forward to gather that data, and also to you, Brock, and to you, Randy, for the efforts that you and your students and BYU has put forward in funding efforts, work, effort, the whole gamut, right? So I just want to put forward, we do have better data today to give our biologists the opportunity to manage by data and drive our herds and our animals and our wildlife into the right direction. And I really appreciate that. So thanks for the board. Thanks to BYU. Thanks to the wildlife and the division. And I support the recommendations as they stand.
Thank you, Brian. Open it back up to the RAC for discussion or clarification from Covey.
Hey, Covey, can you address, do we have the technology to easily have our hunters report their harvest? I mean, would that benefit the division rather? I mean, couldn't the division still do random sampling to verify a mandatory reporting? I mean,
this is one of the things that, if I'm completely honest, for years I pushed back on, and the reason why is because there are other complications with it. If it's mandatory harvest reporting and you don't report, you can't. Am I out of time, Jason? I'm done.
Your time's up, Covey. Please sit down.
Hey, I'll give you some of mine.
If it's and you don't report, it's there's a fine associated with it, because we do have some hunts that are mandatory harvest reporting. We are still pushing towards e-tagging, which would do this anyways. But if I'm completely honest with you, it has become increasingly more difficult the way that we do our surveys. And with I mean, the public doesn't know this, but the biologists, we want the latest, best data we can get. Okay. And so in order to do that, we've contracted with an entity that then helps us with our surveys. They call, they do other things, and they've had a really hard time staffing their facility the last couple of years. They were 60 days late getting us the data this year. And what that turns into is a bunch of biologists around the state hating me because I say, look at your data, look at it now, and we need to make recommendations. And it's not fair. So the simple answer is yes, we can. And I will tell you that it's something that I would like us see us move toward more. And I don't want to speak for the agency and say it's going to be done this year, we're there, but it would actually improve data on the really small hunts. On general season deer, it's not going to, any big hunt, it's not going to change, right? You get enough of a sample size, it's not going to change. It's where your sample size isn't big enough to have a good projection. And so antlerless hunts, small hunts, low numbers, it would give us better data. The argument's always that it could skew the data on oversampling. It could, but we could take a random sample of that, like Mike said. So there are ways to do it, and I think we're headed that way.
Thank you, Kobe. Go ahead, Ken.
Kobe, how far away are we from this E-tag?
Oh, you're not going to ask me that. I said we were a year away 3 years ago. So it's complicated, and it's something we have to do internally. And our team, we've got a small, really good group that's built some really good products for the agency. And they've had sometimes when a bill comes in and changes something, you know, for example, we had a bill that made it so that you can't buy a license if you owe back child support, right? So when a bill comes and changes something like that, their priorities change because now that's the law. So it's jump off e-tagging, make it so that our computer system talks with ORS's computer system and their databases so that we can comply with that law. They're a really hardworking team, and I know it's on the books. They've had some other things come up that have forced them to deviate a little bit, but they're working on it again. I'm not going to say when though, Ken, because I don't want to say a year and then it's 3. It'll probably start with things like cougar and bear, like the trial on something that's not general season deer, maybe. So start with something smaller, hundreds of tags instead of tens of thousands of tags.
Go ahead, Ben.
Thanks, Brock. I want to talk to the SFW recommendation for a minute on the beaver, the Fillmore, and the Penguich Lake. Troy, I appreciate the recommendation. My take on this, though, is this is an example of exactly what we were just discussing earlier in not wanting to swing, like specifically on the Penguich Lake, not wanting to swing back the tags on the increase as quickly as we're cutting them. And so my take on this is, and especially right now, as much as we've cut tags in the last few years, I want to maintain as much opportunity as we possibly can. And so where there's that opportunity to increase permits on Penguich Lake, I think we should do it. And yeah, I again, Troy, I appreciate the recommendation, but I think I fall more in line with the division on these just for the sake of maintaining as much opportunity as possible. Another thing I would like to address, given that these 3 units are all in the southern region, and I was looking over numbers earlier today, and I knew this already, but it was reminded that every unit in the southern region is managed to the higher of the 2 general season objectives, and that bothers me. I know this isn't the deer plan or the deer committee, but I'm just going to throw this out there now. That bothers me, again, for the sake of what opportunities are we losing there because of that higher age or higher buck to doe ratio objectives on those units. I would like to see, just put a thought out there for the next deer committee. What I would like to see is I really think each unit ought to be, each region ought to be split between the two objectives, or let's eliminate the two-tier structure and go back to a single objective for every unit. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Mike?
So I've been contacted by a couple of people about the beaver unit. Covey, do you happen to have the numbers there? Like how many tags have we cut in the last few years?
Yeah, I actually asked Mike to put together a document to help summarize this. So remember, he's taking into account all these data that we've talked about before, but I've got some simple graphs if that's okay if I show those.
Sure, go ahead and show them.
Thank you. These graphs, I think, will illustrate why Mike made the recommendation. But then also understanding he's taking into account things like, again, fawn survival and adult survival. So let me share my screen again. Okay, it should be coming up, and I'm just going to bring this up inside document, but all right. So Mike he put together, like, he's recommending a decrease of 200 permits this year on the beaver, right? He knows that his 3-year average buck-doe ratio is 14.4. Fawn survival is low. But what he also knows is using all of these data when he's predicted, when he had the big cut in permits, he had an inflection point. So 2020 was the low. He came in at 13.2. And this graph below, I wish I could have them up at the same time, was the inflection point, right? So again, 2020, and since 2018, he's cut from 3,500 permits. So in 2018, 3,500 permits, has the inflection point last year, knows that he's trending back up, maybe to get this to go up more quickly from 13.2, a little more quickly back to the 18, he's recommending a very slight reduction. And he's managing to the buck-doe rate. He's doing what we've asked him to do, right? If we look, that's the beaver, right, where he's recommending a slight decrease from 1,400 to 1,200. And if we just go on and look at the graphs from the Pavant, this is the Fillmore Pavant. If you look at it, he bottomed out there at 14, right? And then with the reduction in permits, 2,250 all the way down to 1,200, he bounced right back up to 19. He came within. Looking at survival and recruitment, he's got a little opportunity to offer, and that's why he's recommending to go to 14. So it's the same thing we're doing. It is the exact same thing we're doing on the Pine Valley in reverse. He's projecting forward saying, all right, if I take a little bit more cut here, I'm going to come in. I can add a little bit here and still come in.
I actually like what Mike's done here. I just looked at the data on the Shiny app. And last year at this time, fawn survival was 56%. And as of today, it's 90%. So, yeah.
It probably warrants an increase. Not probably, it does. Good job, Mike. He's listening.
We like Mike. I really like you putting the data up there because the numbers really, I mean, they contrast. I mean, we go from, we've cut 66% of our permits on the beaver, and we're starting to see an increase. And so it feels like the division has been proactive to what's going on. I personally don't see, I know that herd's struggling. I think everybody knows it's struggling. That's why we've cut permits by 66%. And 66% over 3 years, that's 7,000 permits that are gone.
Yeah,
So
I mean, let's be completely clear and transparent. Nobody's saying that the deer herd down there is recovered.
Mm-hmm.
What we're saying is we don't need that much more of a cut to get to where we need to be on the beaver, and we actually have some opportunity to offer on the Pavant. That's what we're saying.
Thanks, Covey.
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, just, I can't remember. Are we on comments or questions?
Discussion
Discussion.
and clarification.
Forgot what to call it. Thank you. I know the division has more data to work with, but I think the bigger point to be made is I think the division's done a better job of making that readily accessible in a way that is easily discernible. And I think, the model you just showed is it's convincing, and it's also a really good justification for the recommendations that you make. And so I have no problem supporting, at least as far as the deer go, all of the recommendations as made. The one point that throughout this conversation was the Pine Valley, and it's the point that Mike and Ben spoke to, which is there's been so much pushback in that individual. It's almost like the history of that unit and the social pressures of it have superseded in a way the kind of argument you're making now. And so I feel like my ultimate sort of leaning or vote considers that very much in relationship with this very persuasive argument. And so I think the real testament is to the division's improvement of making the science more readily accessible to a lot of people, not just having it. So kudos.
Other discussion? I guess I'd entertain motions or motion. Go ahead, Jim.
Last time I did this, I kind of got hit by it, but I make a motion to accept the division's recommendations as they have recommended.
Second.
Who did that second? Chase? Any discussion on the motion? Go ahead, Ben.
Generally, I like it. My one possible hangup is the Pine Valley, just looking at that giant cut and is there room to maybe not cut it quite so far? I don't know. I'm struggling with that one. Outside of that, I think I like where we're at.
That's where I am as well, but I don't get a vote unless it's a tie.
Yeah, I have a lot of heartburn over that. Large of a cut, 60% cut, especially considering some of the recent data that's come out. That said, I'm not really good at, I'm not the guy to pull a number out to say what it should be cut to. And so I just want to get my comments on the record for the Wildlife Board to read that they have the opportunity to maybe look at some more of that data and make a little bit more informed decision. And that in the future, if that unit goes back up in their buck to doe ratio, it should be maintained within the objective and not 25% over the objective.
I would like to go up a little bit, but I don't really get a vote. So that's.
I'd love to hear you expound on that.
Yes.
Regardless of whether or not.
I think with this year's incoming crop having higher than expected survival, we don't know yet. We don't know. And because we don't know, I don't want to go that conservative myself. I mean, I understand where Jason's coming from, and I don't necessarily disagree with the numbers that Covey showed us. But I personally think harvest success is going to be low if there's really that few bucks on there, and we have higher this year fawn survival than we expected so far statewide. Really, in the last 7 years, we have the highest fawn survival to date that we've ever had. And so you wouldn't expect that with drought, but we had great monsoons last fall, and we've had a really mild winter. And so to me, instead of waiting another year, I'd rather come up a couple hundred myself, but that's my opinion.
So you say come up a couple hundred, like you'd go to 1,900 or would you go to an even 2,000?
Easy math.
So 2,000 is still cutting 2,100 permits. Is that right, Covey? Yeah, to me, if I was king, that's what I would do, but I'm not king and I understand I don't want to really question everybody, but I think it's so severe.
I feel the same way, and you know, I mean, I guess if we amended the motion to include that change in that permit number, it can still be, you know, looked at with the current data. I mean, I really have a hard time nitpicking, but what you say, it should still land within the range. It feels like it's an extreme cut, and a less extreme cut could still land them within the range of the management objectives. But
I mean, we won't know till next year. So, I mean, yeah, but it took us 6 years to go from 24 to 19. And if it takes us 2 years to go from 16 to 18, that's better than going from 16 to 20 in 1 year.
I mean, I would add, like, part of my opinion on this is the history on that unit. That's definitely playing into my opinion here. So yeah, I'd be very comfortable going to 2,000 permits on that unit. How do Brock
So
Jason?
Jim would have to be open to a friendly amendment to his. If not, then we'd have to vote on his amendment first and then come up with a different amendment, a different motion.
Well, may I ask then, may I ask Covey a question, or is it too late?
Sure, go ahead. We're in discussion on the motion you have on the table, so
I think my concern is over process. And I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree with anything you're saying. But I don't know that you know as much as they know. And my concern is for us to make a change in someone who's on the ground, who's an expert, and true, we have some brand new data that might lead us in a different direction, to go against, in my opinion, this process of the expert. And as a physician, well, let's forget that. They are the expert. And so I haven't heard anything from you all yet to say, no, the data would suggest otherwise, other than a brand new, some new information that the fawn survival is the best we've ever had, which is awesome. But from a process perspective, I struggle as a new member that we would go against the experts just because we feel it's too much.
So that's actually a really good point. And I will usually stand up and grab the mic when I have huge concerns. And the fact that we're talking about a really large cut and bucks primarily, I think Brock nailed it when he said, so if over harvest is the wrong word. If we harvest a few more, we may make that jump back up to 18 in 2 years instead of 1. And so I understand what Jason's trying to accomplish. He's trying to make sure that he gets back within ratio within a year. It's also not alarming to me if it took a couple years. So if there were a few permits added to this, it's not something that concerns me biologically at all. That's what I'll say. And I support Jason's recommendation at the same time, but this isn't one of those that it's a biological yes or no. It's more of a, hey, if we harvest a few more deer, we may end up coming in at 17.5 and then having it take next year to get back to 15.
adding 300 tags would increase harvest by roughly 90 deer on a unit that has 16,000 deer. So.
Well, based on what Covey was saying, Covey, then you'd be comfortable. Can I ask him that?
Not alarmed.
Yeah.
He would not be alarmed. I don't know that he's comfortable going with a recommendation against one of his biologists.
Yeah.
Not alarmed.
Yeah. Our recommendation is our recommendation. And I would be grabbing the mic, letting you know if I had major biological concerns on any recommendation. And I would be letting the RAC know, hey, we can't support this and here's why. And And I guess the fact that I'm not saying that means that I support our recommendation, and this one doesn't concern me as much as something else.
This amendment wouldn't concern.
Yes.
How many more could we add until you were alarmed?
That's
Be careful.
I think we can easily go state 90,000 statewide, no problem.
so how many do you all want to add?
2,000.
Yeah, if I were to amend the motion, I would recommend 2,000. The current recommendation is 1,700. I would like to see that at 2,000.
Then I'm comfortable with changing my motion to reflect that amendment to be what the division recommends, all with the one exception of the Pine Valley unit increasing to 2,000 from 1,700.
Okay, so
Is the second okay still? Chase, you seconded that.
Yes.
Okay, we have a new motion on the table. Then the motion is to accept the division's recommendation with the exception of only cutting 2,100 tags instead of 2,400 tags from the Pine Valley unit. Any other discussion? Then I'll call the question. All those in favor, raise your hand. Scott?
Yes.
All those
Yes.
opposed? Passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda is bull elk and buck pronghorn permit recommendations. Questions from the RAC for Covey, since Riley Peck is in. Oh, no, that's the next one. Covey. I have one for you, Covey, maybe for Wes. Let me pull up my numbers that I printed off.
What's it on first, elk or pronghorn?
Elk.
Okay.
Central Mountains, Nebo. I was looking at the age objective, and between 2020 and 2021, it went up by a whole year. The harvest age went up by a whole year. And then in the last year, it went up by another half year. And we're now like a full year plus over, and it's on a trend upwards, and we're only increasing tags by 8.
Wes, would you like to take that one?
I gave Wes a heads up, so I'm not blindsiding him.
All right, thanks, Brock. So yes, last year's recommendations were 53 permits on the Nebo. This year, we're recommending to 61. Basically, the philosophy behind this is trying to do a systematic approach instead of a giant increase. We have increased the last several years. That age class has gone up, but trying to take a systematic approach to it instead of a large increase.
What is the population size on the Nebo?
The estimated population is 1,700 right now.
Do you know from your classification what the bull to cow ratio is or not?
I do not remember that right off the top of my head. I can get that, but I don't have it right off.
Okay.
Does the division, when you look at increasing elk tags, I remember that there was only so many you could increase in a year. Weren't your hands kind of tied on how many you can increase, or am I misremembering that?
Yeah, that we used to allow a percentage. We've allowed more freedom on that now. But what I can say is average age obviously is a surrogate for quality, right? That's why we use it. Well, one of the things we learned, so we were trying to manage the Nebo for a higher age objective using really restrictive harvest for several years. Mid-plan review 2 years ago, we changed that. We matched with the Manti and we started to increase permits. What we often find is it takes years to stockpile these bulls to get average age. And then it's working against Wes because when you start to increase permits, you dip into some of those older bulls that have been stockpiled that may be a little bit lower quality than some of the younger bulls. And so I think that's one of the things he's running into, to be honest with you. There's a lot of bulls when you cut that you stockpile, you start to eat into them, and you might kill a 300, 320 bull that's 11 or 10 and so it just pushes that average age up a little bit, and adding those tags can do that too.
I actually like that. I mean, if you have 11-year-olds sitting on the landscape that are 320 inches, let's get them off the landscape.
And I didn't say it was a bad thing. I just said that when you start to add those, sometimes you see that show up of increase in permits at the same time as your increasing age objective. And it's more indicative of the stockpile than it is of, and we'll keep increasing until we hit that age and come into it.
Do you have more data there, Wes?
Yeah,
Is that-
so the bulls per cows is 26 bulls per 100 cows. Another thing that I was going to bring up that just interesting, I don't know if this, take it for what it's worth, but there was 47 elk harvested off the Nebo last year. 31 of those we got an age on. 31 of the 47 we had 31 that we received an age on. I don't know what to make of the other 16, but that's, I think, worth noting. So.
That's actually real great information, Wes. I appreciate that.
I'm doing some
tidbit.
quick math here, but you guys can just have other questions. That's probably not a horrible number. If that's the actual, that's 270 bulls on the unit. And if you're harvesting 61, that's a pretty big number.
And there's a lot of movement from bulls from the rut that move back to the manti also. It wouldn't be counted there.
Other questions from the RAC? I have one more for you, Covey, regarding pronghorn. How many pronghorn are on the Parker Mountain?
I actually do not know that right now.
I called Levi today, 1,100. Why don't we have a hunt on that unit?
I think it'll come, the pronghorn hunt on the Parker will come back. But when we closed that hunt, we agreed to give it some time for those animals to redistribute. Brock, it was not good. Like, we had some things happen to where there was a lot of pressure put on those animals, and they were not available for the public. It showed up in the harvest data, it showed up everywhere. So we said, we'll give it a couple years. It's been 2, right? And Levi actually was in favor. This next year will be 2. Last year was 1. This next year will be 2. And we may give it 1 more until we bring it back. We're going to hunt pronghorn on the Parker, but we'd like those animals to have some safe zones, just like we did on the Wasatch. So we're hunting all around the Parker right now and trying to provide opportunity that way, we'll having that be the safe zone. Same thing we did for elk on the Wasatch. Very similar anyway.
Okay, I just wanted to express my concern. If there's really 1,100 animals and they have low survival, we're just squandering an opportunity, it seems like to me.
I've got a question for you, Covey. I kind of think this is a softball, but yeah. So on the beaver, we raised permits, 13 elk tags were raised, right?
Yeah.
In your professional opinion, will we have 13 spikes survive on the beaver that can replace those 13 bull elk?
Well, yes, but what I can also say is the beaver is an example of one of the units that I brought up at the board, and there are definitely concerns. Like, we take these top tier units and we manage them at this older age class, and then we have to hunt our cows down to a lower number to be able to stay on our population objective. And when we flew the beaver and you look at projections, we're at 1-to-1. Like, we create an unproductive herd by managing for extreme quality. So yes, the answer is yes. And there's a lot of bulls on the beaver.
Yeah, I kind of thought I knew the answer to that. It's the same thing we did on the San Juan, 9 years ago. We shot so many cows and we had more bulls than cows. And then we come back and here we are again. And I hope, I'm hopeful that your meeting on Thursday night, that those men that'll sit around that table can understand the folly in that management strategy.
That's a very fair comment.
So Kobe, what is your opinion on those older age class? Because our data suggests that bulls reach their maximum at 7.5 years old. And so if we're shooting the big bulls, those 380 bulls, when they're 6.5 and 7.5, that's when they first get that big. And the only ones that make it through are the 320s. And we don't shoot those, how do we ever get to 7.5 to 8 or whatever the objective is?
So I'll stay away from giving my opinion, and we'll work through the elk committee to get everybody's opinion. But what I will say is it doesn't matter what resource you're managing, whether it be deer and the Henrys and the Paunsaugunt, or whether it be elk and the Boulder, the Beaver, and the San Juan. Whenever you manage at the very extreme of male quality on the landscape, you do it at the expense of productivity. That's just common biology. If you're going to manage at the extreme, especially if you have a cap on the number of animals you can have, which we do for elk. So if you're going to manage at the extreme of quality, you do it at the expense of reproductivity a lot of times.
Other questions or comments from the RAC? Sure, go ahead, Eric.
So Covey, on the 4 boundary recommendations, those are for new units for the next year? Because there's no numbers or any reference to the numbers in the 2022. But I mean, I guess those boundaries, are they for new ones for 2023?
They're for antlerless.
Oh, those are antlerless.
Yeah, any boundary, additional new boundary changes were for antlerless hunts. We did have some new boundaries, but they came through the fall process for bucks and bulls.
Any other questions from the RAC? Questions from the public? Turn the time over to Jason to summarize the public comments.
All right, thanks, Brock. For the bull elk and buck pronghorn recommendations, we had 19 respondents. We had 47% strongly agree, 21% somewhat agree. We had nobody that was neither agree nor disagree, so 0. 16% somewhat disagree, and 16% strongly disagree. I really only saw 2 of the people that left comments. Specifically, there were 2 primary threads. Again, I'll go back to the first one was they appreciate DWR using data and support the regional biologists' suggestions. And then the other was there's 2 unit specific recommendations that came through. One was for the manti, and they basically said there are too many tags on the manti, and they'd like to see a reduction in tags on the manti. And for the Nebo, also they said they want to see the same or reduce tags on the Nebo unit as well. That's what I have, Brock.
Thank you, Jason. Are there public comments? Troy Justison.
Troy Justison, Sportsman, Fish and Wildlife. We support the division's recommendations on these bucks and bulls once in a lifetime. Speaking to the Parker, I'm glad to hear it's coming back. It was 3 years ago that I had a friend who had a permit on that, and we're the ones that brought up the concern to the division on it. 2.5 days with 3 guys that know how to run glass, we've seen under 100 antelope. You know, growing up in the heyday, a lot of our antelope in the state come from the Parkers. In fact, the laughing joke down there is bucks even had fawns on the Parkers. It was amazing that you could not find an antelope from the Posey turnoff all the way to the Bicknell bottom. they were gone. So it's exciting to hear that they're coming back. So thank you. Oh, one other note, speaking on bulls, a nephew of mine drew the hams hunt on the Barney Top for elk. We killed a large body bull. I could tell he was old, kind of sunken in the hips, in his eye sockets. He's 315. He just got the age back, 14 years old.
That's awesome. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, I'll turn it back to the RAC for discussion, clarification.
I've got one quick clarifying question. On the Wasatch, why were so many permits moved into the mid-season from the other hunts?
Yeah, I've had this question come up a lot, and it's not because we hate the archers or anything like that. The reason, what happened is the elk plan was 7 years old. Over the course of the plan, we implemented some new strategies, we changed some things, we changed splits, and over the last 2 years, we've built a new database to manage our hunt system for biologists. And as we built that database, one of the things we evaluated is where we were at in our metrics and how we're allocating permits as compared to what the plan said. Now, the plan gives some leeway to get out of those, the plan criteria for recommendations under different scenarios. And we evaluated those scenarios, called the biologists and said, is there still a reason to have a different distribution or split here? And on the Wasatch specifically, it was crowding in the early hunt with a lot of permits, move some into that, and then high success in the late hunt or whatever else. But we added that mid hunt to the Wasatch, which we didn't have in the last plan. So we said, there's really not a reason. Let's go back to the regular distribution, which it better mirrors the demand. And so that's what we tried to do. We tried to go back to the regular distribution, better mirror the demand on the landscape. And it created some folks saw it and didn't love it. Some saw it and thought it was great.
Discussion. I'd entertain a motion.
I'd move that we accept the division's recommendations for elk and pronghorn as presented.
Second.
We have a motion from Mike and a second from Eric Reed to accept the division's recommendations as presented. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Scott? Okay, it's unanimous. Next item, once in a lifetime permit recommendations for 2022. Riley, Lucky Dog is out of the country right now. So Covey's here representing once in a lifetime. Questions for Covey? I have one for you, Covey. So I might be remembering this wrong and Ben's not going to like me bringing this up. But it seems like when we put these archery hunts on, we were under the assumption that success was going to be much lower than the rifle. Is that correct or not? And how has success been? I don't remember. I've had people ask me about that, and that's why I'm bringing it up.
It depends on the hunt. So it depends. This last year, that bison hunt on the Henrys, the one that was in late January, I would say that did exactly what it was intended to do. That was a really hard hunt. And some folks got the tag and a few of them harvested. I think there's 7 or 8 permits and 2 harvested on that one. So definitely lower success than a typical bison hunt. So it depends on the species. It depends on the hunt.
I'm thinking more mountain goats.
The first couple years it was lower. It's been pretty close, honestly, to typical any weapon success on mountain goats.
Yeah. And it's pretty comparable on sheep also, 75 to 100%.
Yeah, for the number, sometimes hard on these low permit numbers to get at it exactly because you miss one tag and that goes to 75%, but pretty close on most of the sheep too. It's a fair statement. Put them the last 2 weeks of January.
So I noticed on the Oak Creeks, you raised sheep tags. Where did that additional opportunity go?
Like you talking about the couple permits that were added, the permit was added to the archery hunt?
Yeah, why was the permit added to the archery hunt and not to one of the other hunts? What was the rationale there?
That is one where if I gave you an answer right now, I wouldn't be being completely truthful because I don't know. I'll talk to Mike and ask him why he felt like that was a place. I do know the problem they have on the Oak Creek is that they're trying to, it's not really a weapon type problem. It's that the sheep are in one place when you hunt them. And so I know he feels like adding permits to those current seasons would create crowding on the current hunts. But that's not a factor of the weapon type. It's just a factor of where the sheep are and the number of permits during that hunt. They're in one spot.
Yeah, that one gives me a little bit of heartburn because if we had to add 5 permits or 10 permits, then are we adding another hunt or are we going to give those to the archery hunters on the same basis and the same premise? So that's the one thing that gives me heartburn because I kind of feel like I'll save my comments for the comment period.
Other questions? We don't have any public comments, so I'll turn the time over to, actually we do. Troy Justison. As much as I try to block you out, Troy, Jason's keeping me on track.
You gonna silence me? Whoa, here we go. No, we support the division's recommendations with one exception. One is the Jack Creek. I believe you're recommending 3 permits, correct? Correct me wrong. Does the tribe get a permit there as well?
On the Jack Creek, I think they do. I don't want to say for sure, but I think so.
Our concern is this, those of you who are not familiar with Jack Creek, it's probably our best as far as size-wise, quality unit for bighorns. It's relatively remote. It does not have high sheep densities. Typically, your sportsman tag will hunt there. Typically, your governor's tag will hunt there as well. Our concern is with 3 tags, and then you throw the tribe tag in there, then you throw the other 2 governor's tags. The governor tag and the sports tag, it puts a lot of pressure on that unit. So we had asked that we cut it down to 2. Speaking a little bit to the archery on these sheep things, if we could turn back time and actually hear when these things were actually presented, we presented them as an opportunity and we wanted them put at a time where it was very difficult. The division didn't do us any favors on some of these by the units they chose, and the season dates they were picked were actually pretty good. I still maintain this is a great way to give people the opportunity to go out there. I had the opportunity to speak to both people that drew the desert tags on the Dirty Devil. The one individual never pulled his bow back. The one, Jeremy Chamberlain, who actually killed a ram, said this was absolutely brutal. You should not be given a tag. This was, I got lucky, I killed one. That was the whole idea. There's guys and people out there that think they can get it done to give them the chance to go out there. And so I would hate to see that go away. I think we can sit down and pick some of those units and pick a time frame that is extremely difficult. We know success is going to be low, but let's not get rid of that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy.
Can I ask Troy a question?
Sure, go ahead. Normally not, but sure.
I'm just curious if you can speak more to that. So is your concern with this extra permit that public draw is potentially ruining the opportunity for the sportsman and the statewide tag?
As far as I'm the resource. On that Jack Creek, you get a lot of sheep that come over from the reservation, and it's a relatively small herd. And we put a lot of pressure. We kill a lot of rams out of there. And so my fear is we're putting too much pressure on that unit, and we're actually hampering it as far as ram numbers and its quality. So you bet.
Discussion or clarification from Covey. Covey, do you want to talk to that a little bit? What's the average age of ram harvested? How many rams over 6 years old were, what are we harvesting there? I don't know the answer.
It's not recommended on average age for sheep. Recommend on percent of either rams counted when we fly or percent of total. It's percent of rams over 6.
Right.
But Rusty's looking up the flight data. If I remember, I want to say this correctly. I think we're at the bottom end of what we can recommend and still be within the plan there. So we're pretty low, and Rusty's pulling up those data right now.
Good. I'd like to know if we are at the bottom end, then that'd be good to know.
On that same thread, so do we have units that are closed where the governor's tag and the sports tag rotate? Do we still have those?
No, we
Thank
changed
you.
that. That's a really bad thing. We don't like that. So
Yeah, I was thinking that was.
yep, we're done with that.
Yeah. Oh, just wanted to squash that as an option before we got going.
If I mean, not tonight, but through rule, if we wanted to have areas where we said they couldn't go, anything's a possibility, right? There's a reason why. Pretty cool tags. It's fun for somebody to draw one of those. But if we have concerns, we could always fix that. Just not by rotating it every other year.
Go ahead, Ken.
So Covey, that unit is basically a migratory thing in the fall, or I mean, the sheep are moving on there from the Indian reservation, or is there the herd maintains that area?
The answer is yes to everything. So there's some sheep there. There's some sheep that come off the tribe. There's some, yeah. So it's not all tribal sheep. No, there's sheep that go back and forth.
So it could increase or it could decrease with no trouble at all, just depending on what the sheep decided to do.
Yeah, I mean, but those are a lot of our units, depending upon where they are. You could be hunting the unit on the Utah-Nevada border, and they could be in Nevada one day and Utah the next. Some of these we have cooperative agreements where you can cross over, but other areas it just, if you got a Dolores Triangle elk tag and they didn't come in from Colorado, or I can think of a lot of different examples where the boundary determines success sometimes in migration.
Go ahead, Ben, while we're waiting for Rusty.
I've got a comment pivoting away from sheep, if that's okay. Okay. Looking at, and this isn't a question, just a comment. On mountain goat, looking at the North Slope High Uintas Central unit, the division is recommending a decrease on both the rifle hunt or the any weapon hunt, as well as the archery hunt. 40% decrease on the any weapon hunt, 75% decrease on the archery hunt. I'm perfectly okay with the decrease on both. I think that aligns. My concern is that on the archery hunt drops it down to one tag, which removes which means it's just a random tag. It removes the bonus tag. Personally, I feel we should keep 2 tags on that archery hunt just to maintain that there's a bonus tag on that hunt. So that's something I'd like the RAC to consider when it comes time for a motion.
How many total tags on that unit, Ben?
Yeah, on the any weapon hunt, they're recommending 6, and on the archery hunt, they're recommending 1. and I'm not asking to take from the other, I'm just asking to, so the recommendation is, there was 4 last year in the archery, they're cutting it to 1. I'd like to see that get cut to 2 instead of 1.
Jim, go ahead.
So Covey, the new information that Troy gave with the tribal tag and the sportsman's tag and the governor's tag on that Oak Creek unit, and then you added another tag.
Not Oak
No,
Creek.
sorry, what was it?
Jack
Creek.
Creek.
Thank you, Jack Creek. Thank you. Does that give you pause to add that extra tag?
It's not an addition of a tag. It's the same number recommended last year. I don't know if it gives me pause. I understand the concern. And it'll lead to reduction in quality probably first. If sheep, if they, and I want to confirm there is an exterior boundary permit there, Troy, just so you know. So you're right. And there's the possibility, you could argue that same possibility on every unit across the state though, because the governor's tag and the sportsman's tag could hunt any unit. And they've killed on the Nebo. They've killed on, so they've harvested, they killed on the Wasatch. They've harvested on other units across the state. They often do harvest in Jack Creek. It's a fair point. But it's not always there. And it's, according to our last flight, we're within the guidelines. We're towards the bottom end of the guidelines. It depends on how you round, but you'd have to round down. You could go as low as 2. So I want to make sure that still to be within the plan criteria, you could go as low as 2. I was wrong when I said 3 was the bottom, but 3 is just right off of that. And it's like 2.4 would be the bottom. So.
Thank you, Covey. Any other discussion?
I can kind of see what Ben's saying a little bit on the mountain goat, as long as it's biologically sound. And I still have a little bit of heartburn adding that tag to as an archery tag with so few permits on the Oak Creeks. If that tag's added, the archery tag, the archery odds, would go from like 1 in 60 to 1 in 40, when many of our sheep units are, 1 in 70 to 1 in 200. And so we're offering a special opportunity for a certain number of sportsmen that I think is better served to put into maybe the second season, because the second season we've only got 6 resident permits and 1 non-resident permit, because I believe the non-resident can only hunt the second season. Is that correct? They can't hunt both seasons.
They're set in a season. I have to bring up last year's.
Okay. So I'd personally like to see that the archery tags remain at 2, and that additional tag be added in as a 7th tag, which would be the same number of tags that the first season has. The first season has 7 tags also. So I kind of lean towards that extra tag for the Oak Creeks be placed into the second season. For any weapon hunt, who could then use an archer, or a bow, or a muzzleloader, or a rifle, or whatever is legal.
Go ahead, Covey.
Mike, if it's okay, we were just talking to Mike Wardle, who made the recommendation. He'd give one more piece of information that, if it's okay, I'll share, and that is that one of the reasons why he put that in the archery hunt, and you're right, it would be 7 and 7 if you put it back into the any weapon hunt. But one of the reasons why he put it in the archery hunt was because they did harvest a younger ram with the archery hunt. They were both successful, but they both harvested younger rams. This unit has a lot of potential for younger rams, especially, to move off. And so he felt like putting that opportunity back on archery, they may be successful, but they'll probably harvest a younger age ram that has a higher likelihood of leaving the unit and causing disease concerns. So that was part of his thought process in his recommendation. And I just wanted, fair to put that out there.
So there's biology behind this recommendation.
Well, there's
No, that's
there's some thought given to why he chose that weapon type.
I can live with that.
Any other discussion? Oh, yeah. Well, first we have to have public comment summary that I skipped because.
You're doing a good job, Brock. All right, once in a lifetime permit recommendations, we had 14 individuals provide comment on that. We had 43% strongly agree, 43% somewhat agree, 14% neither agreed nor disagree, and we had zero, nobody had any disagreement, either strong or somewhat. So it was all on the agreement or neither agree nor disagree. There wasn't really any common themes in this. They were, again, happy with the data that the biologists are using and the process and for the recommendations and permit numbers. One person did comment that they'd like to see once in a lifetime points not be species specific. And there was a question about drought issues at higher elevations. But other than that, that's where we stand, Brock.
Thank you, Jason. Now we're back to discussion. Go ahead, Ben, and then Mike.
I was just going to ask if we're ready for a motion, but if Mike's got comments, I'd like to let him go.
Well, that comment on high elevation drought, that stuck with me. And I'm glad you said that. Is that the reason for the mountain goat decline or a reason?
Okay. These are the hardest species we have to study because of where they live and what they do. In the last couple of years, we've gotten out more collars and told the biologists what we really need to get is more cause-specific mortality. And we're willing to, in areas where we can, use helicopter time to go in and recover collars. I think it probably depends on the unit. We've had a couple mountain goats in the Uintas die from mountain lions in the middle of the winter. Just crazy stuff. High elevation, stuff you'd never think of. But Willard has completely changed, and it appears to coincide with the drought. But I don't have all the answers.
So I spent 2 days catching goats with Randall Thacker on the south slope of the Uintas, who's the biologist of that area. He's convinced it's because the females are all accessible and the males are all back in the backcountry. And we know that goats don't start to reproduce until they're 4, sometimes 5 years old. And so if you shoot a mature female, they're really the only ones in the herd that are adding to the herd.
Yeah, and that is not the case on the Willard because they're all right there. Like the population's right. You drive to the end of the road and walk around the corner and there they are. So it could be different things in different areas.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But it's something that as we invest in collars and the more cost specific mortality we can get, when we know what's killing them, then we know why. But goats are hard.
That's going in the quote. When we know what's killing them, we know what's killing them.
You're welcome for that. Could you write that down, Randy? At the end of the day, Randy, right?
Okay, other discussion. I think we are ready for motions or motion. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this. I would move that we accept the division's recommendations with 2 exceptions. One of the exceptions is the recommendation from SFW on the Jack Creek unit. We reduce that from 3 tags to 2. And then the other exception is the
central unit has 2 archery tags.
Yes, the high Uintas Central Mountain Goat unit archery hunt has 2 tags instead of the recommended 1 tag.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion from Ben and a second from Ken that we accept the division's recommendations as presented with 2 exceptions. We recommend 2 tags on the Jack Creek instead of 3. And we recommend 1 additional archery tag on the High Uinta Central so that there is a bonus permit. Mike, go ahead.
I'd just like to hear from Covey, or are we playing biologist here by adding that extra mountain goat tag? I mean, there's a reason why it was cut so severely.
Yeah, I don't know if we're playing biologist. I think that we probably need to maintain our commitment to go back and evaluate these archery hunts. We did promise the board when we implemented these, it was pretty controversial. And we said, we will evaluate success rates because these hunts they're so few permits in once in a lifetime that really a lot of times, if you want to hunt with a bow, you can, or if you want to hunt with any other weapon, you can. Now, we did learn that we can change season structure and affect these. You know, on the Henrys, if you put this in January, 4 bison on the Henrys, you're going to reduce success. I wonder, you know, you put them out and go hunt the second week of January in the Uintas, and you're probably going to reduce success. So there are probably things we can do to impact success, and we did make a commitment. We've also tried to cut some of these and had a lot of pushback through the public process too. So it comes back to that, when you start something, sometimes it's hard to take it back. That said, we've got a commitment to reevaluate these. We'll do that this year. And if they really aren't differing in success, you'll probably see some of them either changed in season structure or go away.
Go ahead, Josh.
I got a question for Ben. Ben, you made the point that by the first sort of caveat you gave, keeping 2 tags so that 1 stayed in the bonus system, and then the second point on the Jack Creek unit, you've essentially taken away the public draw if it's primarily going to these other, 2 tag types. And so don't those 2 recommendations kind of work at odds, like from a management philosophy perspective?
I hear what you're saying, but on the Jack Creek, it's going from 3 to 2. So correct me if I'm wrong, Covey or anybody, at 3, that would be 1 bonus tag and 2 random tags. Correct?
Other way.
Oh, it would be 2 bonus?
It'd be 2 bonus and 1 random.
Okay, I was backwards on that. So I recognize what you're saying, Mike. Intent of the motion there is to recognize the concern from SFW and try to address that concern. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yep, I had it backwards in my head on the sheep.
Like, I guess I liked your motion. I guess I have a hard time supporting it because it seems like it takes that opportunity from the public opportunity. So.
Any other discussion on the motion? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion, which is to accept the division's recommendations as presented with 2 exceptions, reducing Jack Creek by 1, adding 1 archery tag to High Uinta Central goat. All those in favor, oh, go ahead. Okay, Scott, let's hear it, buddy.
No, sorry, I was just voting early.
Way to be there, buddy. Okay, I call the question. All those in favor of the motion? Six. All those opposed? The motion passes 6-3. Do those that dissent want to express their opinion so I can share that at the board meeting?
I just sometimes have a hard time making a biological decision based on giving other people the chance to draw based on a points basis. So.
Okay, Josh.
Just the point that I made, I don't like to see the that lost opportunity when it seems like Kobe made the point. These animals have been killed on that unit in the past by the public, and so that seems like a lost opportunity.
Excellent. Eric?
Yeah, mine is just to support the division's recommendations, and then also the fact that the governor's tag and the sportsman tag can be hunted anywhere in the state, and that pressure doesn't need to be, applied just to one unit.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda. Oh, good. Covey. Antlerless permit recommendations. Questions for Covey on the antlerless permit recommendations. Go ahead, Jim.
So kind of similar to my first question a couple hours ago, but just in the reverse. So we're over objective by 5,400 elk in the state. And our plan is to increase tags by a few. And so, and back to our discussion about how they can compete with deer, and we're so under objective in deer, why not go big or go home when it comes to antlerless elk?
Yeah, you make some really good points. And the reason why is it's where they are, right? It's distribution. So we learned on the Wasatch specifically that you can have a real negative return on your investment in issuing more permits for antlerless because those animals become unavailable. In fact, somebody in this room published a paper on that recently.
So you're saying there's refugia like above Heber City?
So I think, Jim, what we're looking at is where these animals are. This overage is coming from large areas of private land in northern Utah. And so you're only seeing half the story with the permits we're recommending, and Chad tells the other half of that story. And we've been in meetings, our biologists have been in meetings all winter long after these flights, but the CWMU is saying, okay, how are we going to work through this moving forward? Because none of us are where we want to be. So they're a great partner, and we've got to work through it and address it where it is.
So has there been consideration in incentivizing private landowners, large private landowners that are not CWMU? They're not making money on these animals, but they're on their property. Is there it could be a tax incentive, could be any kind of incentive?
I think that's exactly what the private lands only permits have done, because they've incentivized it and they've taken it to where the division doesn't have to be the middleman. So if you're a private landowner and you have more elk on you than you want or can tolerate, you can, when somebody calls you, remember the public, or when you have these problems, you can call folks and say, hey, could you help me out and go harvest a cow? Go buy a private lands only permit and come on the ranch and harvest and remove a cow. So it's already been created. And in some areas it's being marketed, and in other areas landowners are just using it to solve a problem. And whatever way they want to use it, it's fine with me. They want to use it to sell trespass and partner with a hunting guide, our operation, great. If they want to use it to just solve a depredation issue or worried about too many on their property, great. Either way it works.
And so then lastly, like Wasatch West, and you look at the number of tags, there's a limit to the number of antlerless tags. There's a number there.
Private lands only or?
Private land only.
Yeah, and we did increase those this year. They were set at a number that was never hit. Were they hit this last year, Rusty? Seriously? We increased those. I don't know if we hit the cap this last year.
Yeah, so that was gonna be my question, is why not make it a really big number? Why not just let it, so you don't hit that cap, so you just keep reducing the number of cows that then would allow more forage for maybe mule deer or whatever. What?
That's a great regional question that they could answer, why they put that number down.
I'll be honest, I was thinking ahead to CWMU stuff, and Sounds like you're asking about the private land only permits and why that number is what it is. For a couple of years, it was 1,000, right, Dale? It was just kind of inflate. Nobody was buying that many. There was just a lot of unpurchased permits. And so it was kind of inflating our numbers, trying to do the math. And we thought, let's get to a more realistic number that people would actually purchase. And we took a shot in the dark and did 300 this year. And then I think we sold out, which we don't want to do. And so this year we upped it to 400. And I think that's kind of right where we want to be, I think. So that's why we did it.
I guess a better question, Jim, may be, would there be a concern? And I think this is a question that I'll ask the region standing here as Jim. Is there a concern if that number were 500? Okay. Or 600? No. So that number is not of concern. What limits the number of elk harvested is access. And it really helps private landowners solve problems while maintaining elk on public land and available to sportsmen.
If we only knew somebody that lived on those big private land areas. I'm playing with you, Jim. Go ahead, Ken.
Covey, I'm kind of going around and around about this. We talked about the Pine Valley, we upped the permits. We talked about doe survival, I think you said 77%.
That was last year.
Last year, yeah. And then we want to kill off the deer in New Harmony, which is on Pine Valley. Now, if I understand it right, if we don't allow the hunters to kill the deer, then the division goes in and kills the deer. Yet we still, so either way, we got a problem there. We can't move deer because of disease. Can we move them back on that unit? Could we capture them in New Harmony and move them still on the same unit somewhere else?
You could. It probably won't work, but you could. But this came up before. It's come up when we've met with the sportsmen's organizations as to why these doe hunts. If you look at the dates, they're very targeted. They're hitting resident deer that are in the crops. These go from August 1st to August 17th. And they're addressing a depredation problem or issue with specific landowners. Now, without getting into specifics, a lot of these deer are probably never available to most public hunters that we're talking about targeting. We're giving this opportunity back to the public, and then a lot of this is private property, and they've got to get access. They gain access with their permit. And some folks who have access will apply for one of these permits as well. The division has a duty, and the way code reads is it says we're mandated to alleviate the damage, to work with private landowners to alleviate the damage. The key word there is damage, right? And so it depends on what the private landowner views as damage, how much he's willing to tolerate, how many deer he's willing to allow on his property. And when he comes and says, I need somebody to help me, I need some alleviation from this damage that I'm incurring from deer, right? And at that point, we respond. When we do that, we try to use tools that give this opportunity back to public hunters. Because that mandate is on us, we try to spread it back to public hunters and give them the opportunity when we can. And if not, we do and have and will remove animals when they're in areas that they're never accessible to public sportsmen, and causing damage that make it so that landowners won't tolerate those deer that come out in the fall and the spring. What we want them to do is tolerate the animals that come off the mountain, fall in the spring, and they're willing to say, hey, I'm okay with these. You can compensate me for some of the damage on these, but these ones that are just growing and living here, not okay with these. And it makes sense. Remove these ones that are here year round and in the summer and never leave, to then allow the ones that come off the mountain to be tolerated. That's the majority of our antlerless hunts with deer, right? That's the strategy with antlerless hunts with deer. It's in an area where we can try to give some of this opportunity back to the public. I understand the sentiment of not harvesting any does, And if the sportsmen really feel that way, get in touch with your local biologist, understand the depredation needs, and sit down and find a way to help out landowners that are receiving damage. If they don't want any deer harvested, sportsmen have a lot more control here than the division. And if they're willing to be that bridge and have those discussions and have those meetings, then the damage goes away. And when the damage goes away, we don't have to alleviate the damage. So that's my advice.
Thank you,
Okay.
Covey. Go ahead, Ken.
But Covey, what about, I don't know if this is happening or not, but what about the property owner who wants compensation for the damage done, yet he will not allow people to go in there and shoot him? Do we still give him, do we still pay for damages, or do we say either let the people in there or eat it yourself?
Landowners have to allow reasonable access to allow us to help solve the problem. And I will tell you, most landowners are really, really reasonable. They are. Obviously, they're not going to want a bunch of hunters in their feedlots next to their homes or their houses with high-powered rifles. I think that's fair. But the landowners we deal with, the majority of the landowners that we interact with on a daily basis are super, super reasonable. And a lot of them allow access to help solve their problems.
So what you're saying then is the deer that are become resident deer are going to go one way or the other, either by hunters or by the division going in and disposing of them.
If they're viewed as causing damage, we have to alleviate that damage. That's what I'm saying.
Good answer, Covey. Careful. Other questions for Covey?
Yeah, Covey, Wasatch Mountains current creek unit, over population by 1,000 or so, antlerless elk, no public draw tags.
It's over by, yeah, that's including the citability. We probably saw our citability index was probably low there. We had really good conditions when we flew that flight. It's probably closer to the objective.
Okay.
And we were going to start hunting that population again. That's where we did the big study on elk and know that we made them unavailable. So before we start those hunts back up, we want to go collar a bunch of elk and do it in a different way so we don't end up in the same place. So this next year, we've got plans to collar a bunch of elk and then implement the hunts and then make sure that we hunt them in a way where they stay available to sportsmen. So we're asking for a year of patience, that's all.
Yeah, no, I like that answer.
Any other questions from the public?
I've got one from the RAC still. I wonder if Covey could speak to the LaSalle unit. It looks like the direction there has changed a little bit. It's a little awkward. I'm curious what's going on with that.
Yeah, Scott, so some of that is how we summarize the population objective and the permits. If you take out the migratory herd, so there's LaSalle and then LaSalle Dolores Triangle, and we present those together, but the Dolores Triangle, those aren't the same elk. And so part of that's on our fault on how we present it. So it looks like we're above the population objective and decreasing cow tags. Is that what you're seeing, Scott? But when you take those Dolores elk back out, that's not what's going on. We're actually below the population objective and about where we want to be, and we can back off a little bit. So that's the rationale there. And then the elk that come in from Colorado on that triangle, we hunt those, but those are really, really migratory.
Okay, thank you.
Questions from the, oh, wait, we already did that. Turning the time over to Jason to give a summary of the public comments.
Thanks, Brock. We had 14 respondents for the antlerless permit recommendations. We had 36% strongly agree, 29% somewhat agree, 7 neither agree nor disagree, 14 somewhat disagree, and 14% strongly disagree. Really, there was a theme. We only had 7 people leave a comment. out of the 14 that voted, I suppose, on this or left their impression. And the ones that left comments were ones that disagreed primarily. And their comments were they don't support any antlerless hunts whatsoever. And in fact, some wanted to eliminate the doe hunts entirely. There was a comment that they think the idea of antlerless tags are a good idea, especially in bad conditions, habitat issues and things like that. So that's what I have, Brock.
Thank you. Public comments, Troy Justison.
Troy Justison, Sportsman, Fish and Wildlife. We support the division's recommendations excluding taking does on the Pine Valley. We appreciate what Covey said. We fully understand it, but our local chapters and guys are adamantly opposed to taking does off that unit. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. Bring it back to the RAC for discussion, clarification.
Just a quick comment. 600 and some odd doe permits comes out to about 0.2% of our deer population. So I know you can get heated on an individual unit, but the effect we're having on the overall population is about as minimal as we can get.
I generally agree with you, Scott. And in fact, some of those we want gone, especially like out in the Mighton unit where we have a CWD problem. If there's no discussion, I'd entertain a motion. Go
I'll
ahead,
make a
Jim.
motion that we accept the antlerless permit recommendations for 2022 as per the division's recommendations.
We have a motion from Jim Schuler and a second from Josh Leonard that we accept the division's recommendations as presented. Any discussion on the motion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? I saw that. Unanimous. Agenda item number 9. Hey, Covey's done. Chad Wilson, CWMU permit recommendations. Antlerless permit recommendations. Questions for Chad?
I've got a question. We've mentioned several times that in some of these areas where elk are refuging on private lands, that we're working with CWMU operators to try to deal with that issue. I guess I was under the impression that antlerless tags on CWMUs are fixed at the time of a renewal and that those don't vary year to year. Can you address that?
Yeah, Scott, they actually do vary. This is where we set those numbers. So we can do a change application every year if need be to increase or decrease antlerless permits.
I've got I think it's going to be along that same line. You can, but do you find that you do?
And I guess you saw the presentation. So we saw there were some change applications. A lot of times it's not real significant, I guess. And I think that's what you're getting at is,
yeah.
I think a couple years ago, Deseret really increased theirs a bunch, but yeah, it's usually marginal.
Yeah, usually it's not really adaptive and it's not fluid like our general season unit or our herd management units are. It usually feels like it's a lot more static. It doesn't vary year to year. I went back through and looked at many of the hunts and that's what I noticed. And I think that's what Scott's getting at too.
Chad, do you feel you've maximized the amount of antlerless elk permits that the CWMUs, not that they'll accept, but from a biological perspective, would you like to see more antlerless permits in those CWMUs or are you comfortable with the numbers?
Yeah, that's a loaded question there. Since I'm not the biologist over all of these units, we try to make those decisions lie with those biologists that are there on the ground and know the units very well. With that being said, we are always looking, especially in areas where we're over objective, of ways that we can harvest more. So there is potential that there would be potential for increase on CWMUs to help where we're over objective.
Is there operator pushback to more antlerless elk permits?
Yeah, at times there are. Yeah, to be completely honest, at times it's not their favorite thing to do.
And is that because most of them go to the public?
I would say that's probably a fair assumption. Is they make their money off of the bulls, and so the public cow permits, there's not a lot of money into it. But I don't think it just stops there. I think at times, Covey alluded to this, is, before we had the CWMU program, in a lot of these units in northern Utah, there was no tolerance for elk. They didn't want any elk. Now they want elk. So it's not just that there's not money, but their cows is what's bringing the bulls in, right? So they don't want to disperse all the cows. They want those cows there. They want a healthy herd of elk. They want more elk on them. So it's not just as simple as we don't make any money off of this.
Maybe there's some give and take in the future. I would think the public sentiment for CWMUs might improve if you increase the number of public tags, public access to the CWMUs in the antlerless categories, while at the same time improving your biological objective. You would think that for the amount of money they're getting per bull, they might be willing to negotiate that, I would think.
As a follow-up to that, Chad, this has been my concern. One of the decisions to allocate bull tags is how many elk that are on their property, what proportion of the herd. But if we never get cooperation to reduce the objective, they serve as a refuge and they suck in. It's a cooperative wildlife management unit.
Yeah, it is. And in my viewpoint, the cooperation on our end is that we give them vouchers, and the cooperation for their end should mostly be to help manage our units. It is complex, though, as I say that. I think of the East Canyon unit. I know there was push to try to get more cow tags there. There's also a large tract of land in that unit that is private that doesn't allow any hunting or relatively little hunting. The elk pile up on that land. So even a lot of the CWMU operators is like, they'll come and tell us, so like, if I had them, I'd be happy. I'd be super happy to kill 20, but the elk just aren't on our property to harvest that amount. So we say it, but it's just not always cut and dry, I guess is what I'm saying.
So Chad, this is a real significant issue for me. Sitting on that private lands, public wildlife committee right now, this is a substantial issue. This is the crux of the public benefit of a CWMU program. We discuss, I'm okay with the 90-10 split. Frankly, it kills me, but in exchange for that, it's as hard to draw a cow permit on some units as it is a bull permit. It's crazy. So representing the public, I'm okay with the public getting access on a CWU to hunt a cow elk rather than a 50-50 split or 60-40 for bucks and bulls. But the numbers just absolutely do not match up. I know in the past you guys have talked about, hey, what percentage of the population do you have to impact to get that herd to move? And maybe you could address that. But I think we need to be harvesting enough cows that we're approaching getting that herd to move back onto public ground.
Yeah, and to be transparent with you, Scott, we're going to have a CWMU advisory committee meeting coming up. And one of the things that we're going to discuss is what measures we can look at. to talk to CWMUs to make sure that they're carrying their weight. Some of that is probably going to be the amount of bulls that they kill compared to the amount of cows that they have. A few different measures that we're going to look at. It is something that I want to tackle, dive into a little bit more, see if we can make some more progress there to get more, I guess, to get more help in our over objective units.
Yeah, I don't know that we're going to solve anything tonight, but there's a lot of discussion that needs to go on there. And my perspective is public opportunity needs to be increased substantially for cow elk on these CWMUs. And I'll just leave it at that.
I've got a question for the harvest rates. It seems like the harvest rates of your bull tags on CWMUs is pretty high, and it seems like the harvest rate on Antlerless is fairly low. Is that a fair statement, do you think? I mean, overall in general, not specific to any one unit.
I'd say they're lower than the bull ones for sure. I think when you look at most of them, the harvest success on a CWMU is higher than our surrounding public land hunts. That is one of the criteria too that I think we should look at, is if it's lower than what it is on the surrounding public land, then they might need to be doing a better job. But yeah, so I don't know. Did that answer it?
So I have one comment / question. It comes up when we talk CWMUs quite often, but I noticed one of the CWMUs up for renewal has a full section of public land on it. 640, looks like the TL bar. And there's, being a public land manager, selling hunts on public land, if they're not coordinating, having the appropriate permits to sell as an outfitter guide with that agency, or even just selling access to public land. I just want to bring that point up and to see if there's because they're using that public land to meet the minimum acreage for a CWMU. And, just kind of some discussion on that.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I know we've talked about that here a lot. And now I'm not going to remember, I think it's in code, not just rule, that it states that if you have public land that they need to understand and have the proper licensings and everything else to be on that public land. So the guiding stuff, that's something that we're going to add into our application going forward, is that they need to check a box saying that they understand that they need to have the proper licensing to be on the public land, if public land is included in their CWMU.
Any other questions? Public questions? Turn the time over to Jason, I guess.
Thanks, Brock. For the CWMU Antlerless permit recommendations, we had 11 respondents. 18% strongly agree, 27% somewhat agree, 45% neither agree nor disagree. There was 0% that somewhat disagreed, and 9% were strongly disagreed. We had very few comments ranging from dislike of the CWMU program. As has been discussed, there was a comment about disproportional allocations on the CWMUs, and then also concern from one about any antlerless hunts on the CWMUs as well, similar to what we talked about previously in the antlerless hunts, general season antlerless hunts. So.
Thank you. Bring it back to the RAC for discussion. There are none. Thank you for trying to keep me on track. Go ahead, Danny.
Yeah, Chad, I just want to make, I know that landowner. I think I know who you're talking about, East Canyon, and it's been like that forever, right? But the nice thing is, this is just the light at the end of the tunnel, is that, people don't last forever. And why are you smiling? And so things change, and I'm kind of, and I don't know about you, I'm hoping to be optimistic about that landowner, because not only is it causing real problems with the herd, it's causing real skirmish amongst hunters around the fringes on either public land or on other private lands. And so I'm sure you don't want to make too much of a comment there, but there is hope, I think.
Yeah, I will comment on that, just that we do see that as land passes from one person to another, sometimes you get somebody who has a different philosophy and is easier to work with on managing wildlife. So, yeah.
Go ahead, Mike, if you have something.
Yeah, so I'm pretty familiar with the CWMU program, as you guys well know. I'm kind of inclined to vote against the recommendations tonight for the simple fact that I don't think the CWMUs are pulling their weight in the cooperative side of things. We always talk about how many public tags the CWMU offers, the program offers to the public and access, but that access comes in the form of antlerless. It doesn't really come in, it comes a little bit in the form of bucks and bulls. Many of the CWMUs, especially on antlerless elk, if they only qualify for 5, to take 5 bull elk off their CWMU, they don't choose a 90-10 split. They choose an 80-20 split. And what that does is that gives them a bulk of the antlerless tags. But if a CWMU gets 10 bull elk tags, and that means 9 go to the CWMU and 1 to the public, then they have to give 100% of their antlerless elk tags to the public. So I think there's a real disconnect in how we're distributing the opportunity on CWMUs currently. And while I'm very supportive of the program, I just find the lack of fluidity in permit numbers. I mean, if herds are up, we should be shooting elk, and if herds are down, we should be pulling back on the tags. But we really don't see that over the years with the CWMU program, and it's not Chad's fault at all. I just really think it falls on the shoulders of the CWMUs and their willingness to be a good partner with the state. So I'm actually on the fence of whether I'm going to vote for the division's recommendation or against it. So
Go ahead, Ben.
Mike, I'm processing what you just said. I'm trying to understand if you were to vote. So if I hear you right, you want to see more antlerless harvest on CWMUs. If you voted against this, I guess I don't understand that vote of opposition, because wouldn't a vote against this recommendation essentially mean no antlerless harvest?
Well, I'm not naive enough to think that this isn't going to pass the board and through the public process.
Fair.
I think it's important that somebody stands up and says on record, because this is going to be there for other people to see, that there's some changes that need to be made within the program. I personally believe we should have more tags on many of these units, not on all. There's many units that they're so far over herd objectives that if that was public land, we'd be slaughtering the cows, and that public would have that opportunity, and they're currently not getting it right now. And that's what I see in the data that I obtained through serving and how I serve. So. And I'm not asking everybody here to vote against it. I'm just stating how I feel.
Hey, I think that's a great point, Mike, and I'll follow your lead tonight on that. I think a message needs to be sent, and this is the time to do it. I agree it's not going to change the board's vote, but it'll send a message.
Go ahead, Jim.
I'm going to vote in favor, but I still feel that there needs to be intentional discussion with the CWMU operators to increase the antlerless elk permits if we found that the problem is too many of them are on their land and they're not giving public access. And I believe that it is in the benefit of the public to go into that land and kill antlerless elk to then move the herd to the public for the public to benefit from it. So I'm going to vote in favor because I don't think this is maybe the method to change it. But I'm hearing a lot of the same tone, is that they're not pulling their weight. And if they have too many elk, eventually they're going to eat the forage to then move anyway, unless these are really prime lands, and I'm sure that they are. But if they have too many for too long, they're not going to stay there. They're going to go to where there's some better forage for them. But I don't know the process of how to push the division to work with the CWMU operators to be able to increase the public access to the antlerless elk while there's still an oversubscription of elk.
Well, keep in mind, this RAC was one vote away less than a year ago from not renewing the permits of any CWMU with public land in holding. It failed by one vote. And so, like, in the message bill, which
Why'd you point at me, Josh?
I was scratching my nose. I mean, I'm all for a message vote, but I mean, like, I know it's not, we're setting quotas, and so this is down the rabbit trail, but like, has that first issue ever been addressed in the time that's elapsed since? If we send this message to say, like, no, we want more input or investigation into the process, like, I mean, is that in the works, or is that, I don't know if you can speak that in terms of quota numbers, but would a message like that even have any resonance beyond a vote here? That
Yeah,
what would that echo look like?
I think so. I mean, I'll be candid with you. This is the RAC that I come to, that I get all of the CWMU questions, right? and the CWMU program gets beat up quite a bit here. It does afford me the opportunity that when CWMU operators come and say things about the program, I say, go watch the Central Region RAC and see how some of the people that are on that RAC feel about some of the things that are happening on the CWMU program. When we talk about public lands, right? Say, you want the public land. I understand you want the public land in your CWMU. Not everybody sees it that way. And sometimes they have a hard time believing that. And I can point them back to this RAC. So when people voice their opinion on a record like this, it does help. It shows that I mean, if everybody just votes yes and we go on down the road, then there's no issues, right? There's nothing to talk about. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. I think it helps. And there are things in the works, like I said, with the CWMU advisory. This is something that we've been busy, haven't we, Mike? We've already had 3 meetings this year, and the one that I've been wanting to do since I became the coordinator is to really talk about cow elk harvest and what measurable, because the other thing I'll say is every year, every CWMU operator is required to do an operator training. Every single year, even before me, we've hounded on antlerless harvest and that we need to have the antlerless harvest. To Mike's point, there's not been a ton of change in that. So it's something that as a coordinator that I'm committed to seeing how we get that change, what it looks like. CWMU plan, or the CWMU rules, probably going to be open this summer too. So that'll be another crack at it as well, to see if we can come up with maybe some creative ideas of how to get that done.
Danny?
Yeah, so the reason I would vote for the the proposal is because quite frankly, what these operators who aren't cooperating as well are doing is that by default is that any hunting that does take place, that's pushing the critters around and stirring the pot. And so those cows can be killed in adjacent properties or other, public land adjacent to that. And also the thing that I've noticed is that these less cooperative participants in the private property realm are literally stockpiling bull elk. And so it's, when I get to the top of a ridge and I say, find me a spike, and there's no spikes, then there's too many elk. There's too many bull elk, and that's all you can see is antlers. And so it's like, oh man, we need to do something about this. And so I just say that stirring the pot through this program is the reason that I continue to support it and hope that they will come around either through their son taking over or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm probably one of Chad's biggest headaches when it comes to talking about this because of the same reason that Luke brought it up. As we've talked, and if the rule comes open, I think there's a good opportunity there. I don't know if this is an opportunity to play biologist where we play biologist in the, the general and the other ends of it. Is there an opportunity to ask for more tags, in this process here? If the recommendation, is it coming from, and probably should have asked this during the question portion, but does the recommendation come from the division, from the biologists, and then has to be applied to their application renewal, that they basically have to agree to that change for their change application to come in? Or how does your recommendation get into the CWMU's application to either renew theirs to reflect your recommendations?
Yeah, so there's a couple of processes there. When they renew them, then we'll put in there, it's on a 3-year renewal, right? So generally the biologist will have that conversation with the operator. They'll come to a consensus of how many antlerless tags they'll have. And with that, a minimum harvest over the 3 years. That's one of the other things we probably need to track better as the division is that minimum harvest and if they're hitting those measures. So at the beginning, so when they renew, so we had a couple renewals on this one, right? So essentially that number that we're saying is a number that was agreed upon between the biologist, the division, and the CWMU operator. There is opportunity. We don't have to agree on that number. The division can have a recommendation that can be different than the CWMU operator, and we could bring those numbers through the RAC. I don't know that that's ever happened to date. And then on a change application, it's the same. We can make a change, and we could make the recommendation, and they could have a differing recommendation than ours, and it would come before the RAC and the board. Or a lot of times, like the ones that we did here, we were on the same page we were in agreement, I guess, on what those numbers are.
All right, so I guess my comment is whether we were to vote for or against this, I think, the point of getting them to be more cooperative and especially when they're using public lands to help facilitate their programs and their what they want to get out of it too, that we may not be able to, voice our opinion, vote no. What do we get? If we have an opportunity to open it up if the rule comes open and there's an opportunity to make some of that change, maybe that's a better place to do it as opposed to, tonight, unless we decide we can play biologist and put a number in there that's just going to get, shot down at the other end anyway.
Any other discussion? I'd entertain motions or motion. Fail to pass for lack of, no, go ahead.
I'll make the motion to approve as presented.
We have a motion from Ben to approve the recommendations as presented. It's been seconded by Jim Schuler. Any discussion on the motion? Call the question. Oh, go ahead, Jim.
Right. So Chad, you will emphasize to the operators to listen to this discussion to hear what the RAC members' concerns are as far as the antlerless elk issue?
I have frequently
Okay.
referred them back to the Central Region RAC. Now, whether they listen to it or not, I don't know, but yes, I do.
I'll call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? Passes 6-3. That's the last thing on the agenda. I think, anybody have a new agenda item?
No. Mine was included in the original discussion,
Excellent.
that the antelope issue relative to the inland port. So that was it.
Then I adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it.